There are many of us who are just getting started in home coffee roasting. Some have been doing it for a while, and we're using a free logging software called Artisan. It's an open source software that is available for download here on the web. I'll have a link in the description. But today in this video, I want to share with you some of the basics of Artisan and how I use Artisan to help me get through the roasting phases. So stick around. All right, thank you so much for joining me today, and welcome to the Virtual Coffee Lab. I've done a lot of videos, and some of them have included this graph that I show, like this one here on the screen. And this is a free software that is used to help track our times and temperatures and events here as we roast coffee at home. So some of you may be familiar with Artisan. Some of you may have been using it, but you're not using it to its fullest potential. And others are wondering how to even get started with Artisan. And so I want to do that today. I want to cover some of the basics so that we know how to roast coffee using a logging software. But today the focus isn't necessarily on how to hook up Artisan or about probe placement or anything like that. It's merely about the basics of logging your data and events and then learning from it, and then using that information as you're roasting to be able to control how you want to move through each phase. And so let's get right to it. All right, you'll see on the screen here I have Artisan open. You'll see that the temperatures are displayed to the right. 481 degrees is my exhaust temperature. 380.8 degrees is the bean temp probe. You'll also notice some buttons down at the bottom. These are customizable buttons, and I have them marked here. So the top row you'll see shows my various energy settings, and these are pre-programmable. So I basically create the button and give it a name or a label, and also what that label represents. So that would be like 1.8 kPa for my gas, all the way down to 0.1 kPa for my gas. And I can choose any one of those buttons, and it will mark that on the graph, and you'll see that happening as we use it. The blue buttons represent my airflow, and I've dialed in certain numbers of my airflow, and then the drum speed is in the gray. So I've got these buttons set here. Artisan is turned on. The timer has not gone off yet because I haven't hit start. And once I have determined that my charge temperature is where I want it to be for my roaster, then I'll go ahead and press the start button. So we're going to get started with this. We're going to do a roast with a Guatemalan Huehue coffee that I'm roasting, and you'll see, and I'll narrate all of the different steps of what I'm doing here. I'll also include some annotations so that you'll see what I'm talking about. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. I hit the start button, and all of a sudden to the left of the start, you'll see the charge temperature. I hit charge, and right away the blue line and the red line appear on the left, and you'll notice that they're dropping rapidly. And that's because I currently have the gas off. I'm going to be doing a soak for about a minute, and then I'm going to turn the gas on, and you'll see that. So if you watch the counter in the upper right hand corner, we're at 35 seconds on the soak. We're going to turn the gas on at about 1 minute, and you'll see that I mark that in Artisan. All right, 1 minute, and you see that I marked the 1.0 kPa. That's where my mouse is, right down there in the red, which turned gray, that little square. And it also marked it as a little gray diamond on the screen. So here I am with my energy on now at 1 kPa, which represents about 70% of my energy, and my exhaust temp is rising. Turning point just is about to happen. I just marked my air just because I wanted to have a reference of where I am with my air, and I also marked my drum. Okay, so here comes turning point. You see the bean temp, the delta temp at the bottom right just went from a negative to a positive. That represents turning point during the initial soak. And my turning point time was 1 minute and 33 seconds with a temperature of 257.9 degrees. We're going to see the temperature, we're going to see the time appear up on the right. The dry time, right now it says 7 minutes, 6 minutes and 51 seconds. It just changed to that. And it is slowly getting shorter and shorter, and my target is somewhere around 5 minutes. That's usually what it is. I'm going to be behind that a little bit because I had probably should have chosen a 385 degree charge temperature, but regardless, that's okay. I just decided to do 380 degrees and 490 degree exhaust temp. So you'll see that there's a big difference between the drum temp, that's that blue line that is starting to go up, the dark blue line, and then the red line, which is the exhaust temp. They kind of parallel each other. As the temperatures increase, you'll see that my temperature is increasing because my rate of rise is displaying in the lighter blue line. Now I want to share with you, I changed my drum speed right around the 3 minute mark. If you look at the exhaust temp, you'll see the the exhaust temperature actually went down a little bit. And that's something that always happens when I increase my drum speed. I increased my drum speed to create a little more airflow. My rate of rise popped up, and it has peaked at about 25, maybe 24. It looks like it peaked at. And I'm now starting to look at my coffee, and I apologize for some of the blurriness with the trier. My autofocus on the camera kind of wasn't being very friendly, and so when I pull the trier out for you to see the color of the coffee, it might be a little blurry, so I'm sorry about that. You should still be able to see the color change. Alright, so my dry time says right now I'm at 5 minutes and 25 seconds. That is what Artisan is estimating that my dry phase will be complete and my coffee will be yellow. So that's an estimate, and I am, as you've seen here in the screen, I am watching the bean color, and I'm looking at the bean physical changes to the bean. It's turning a pale green. That is the color that will go from that dark olive green. It'll start to turn kind of a brighter pale green, and then it will ultimately start to turn yellow. My goal is to have it be completely yellow with no green, and it takes a while to get used to that. That's what I've chosen. So I'm looking here, and it's still pale. It's definitely getting more yellow, and the light is kind of bright. Hopefully you can see the color. I'm getting really close here to calling dry, and I hit dry end. So there's no green left in the bean. It's all yellow now, and I marked dry, and you can see here on Artisan that it's 328.2 degrees. My range for a lot of my coffees for dry is anywhere between 325 and 335. My coffee will turn yellow in that temperature range on my roaster. I have also increased my air, and I marked it in Artisan, and I lowered my temperature. My temperature was lowered to 0.5, and then I lowered it to 0.4, and you can see that marked. It's in gray. That doesn't really show up very well, but that's what it is. It's there in the gray. And you can see my descent. Now take a careful look at it says ramp. So it's dry, and then it says ramp, and then it says first crack at the very top of the screen. So my estimated first crack time is right now 9:17. That number just to the left of that 357 number, 354 number, that's the number that I'm watching right now. That's the number that I am going to target for my middle phase time. That's the middle phase time. So if I want a middle phase of 4 minutes, a browning phase of 4 minutes, that's the number that I'm trying to manipulate. So my rate of rise, whether it goes down faster or up or down slower, that number is going to change. So right now it's at 402, 403 based on the angle of descent that I have in my rate of rise. And you can see that there are some ebbs and flows that are going on, and so that number's kind of bouncing around a little bit. But we're at 406 right now on the estimated browning phase time. And ideally I would have liked close to 4 minutes, 3:45 to 4 minutes for this roast, because my dry phase was a little bit longer. So if your dry phase, my dry phase was what, 5:15? If it would have been 5 minutes, I would have liked to have targeted probably closer to 3:45 to 3:50 for my middle phase. But I'm at 4:10 right now, 4:09, 4:08, and we're going to see where that ends up. My first crack, you can see that time is 9:29 is what the estimate is there. So I'm watching that along with watching the bean color. You can see I've been looking at the trier, kind of watching the bean color. I can smell the coffee coming out of the roaster. I really won't get to the smelling till I'm at just after the first crack is where I really start to smell for different notes, different types of aromas that help me understand where I'm at in the roasting process. So I've kind of shallowed my descent a little bit because I don't want to get too much longer than this 4:10, 4:15 browning phase. And I'm getting really close to calling first crack. I'm listening for the cracks, and then I marked it. So I marked first crack. My first crack time was 9:09 and a 385 degree temperature. Also, now this next percentage, or this devs square, you see it says 5.2. That is my percentage for the development phase. This is going to be the development phase, so I'm targeting around 15 to 18% for my development time with this coffee. I know that a lot of you have heard you have to have 20%, and honestly 20% is a great place to start, and then from there you customize it based on the style of roasting, the type of coffee you're roasting with, and ultimately what your end goal is, what you want that coffee to be like. And so mine is around 15%, and so my rate of rise is continuing to go down. I was working hard to try to avoid a flick and a crash. I got the flick, but I did avoid the crash, and we're getting fairly close here. I want to drop this coffee around 399 degrees, 398, 399, and I dropped the coffee at 398.9 degrees. I'm leaving Artisan on here because I want you to see this. The cooling fan was turned on prior to the drop. You can hear it and see it in the picture, but ultimately this coffee, I'm pleased with the roast. Maybe would have liked a little bit longer development time. This is going to be maybe a little brighter with the acidity for this coffee, but I didn't want to take the coffee too dark. I don't like to go with this coffee much past 400 degrees, sometimes 401, but that's usually roasting out some of the acidity that I like. So I like to keep it around 399 degrees or so. So this was a decent roast. What I'd like to do is take a look at the beans. And you can see here's an example of a bean that got away from me. That I kind of went through these beans before I roasted them, and I got out some of the ones that looked like they had been eaten by some insects, but there were a couple that had some weird defects, and I popped those out. Not roasting defects, but just defects in the beans themselves. So here I'm kind of looking at this. I don't see any roasting defects. I'm looking for tipping. I'm looking for scorching. I'm just looking overall at the bean itself. I should have cracked one open here in front of the camera, but ultimately I was looking for an even roast, and I definitely saw that. And now I'm looking at, I'm thinking about the temperature that I dropped it at, and I'm looking at the modeling of the beans. So basically, I like to see some wrinkles in the beans, and so here in this picture, I'm showing you, here's a bean that's got some wrinkles in it. Most of the beans look like this. Let me get the camera to try to show it better, and I'll grab another bean. So this has this wrinkling look and a texture on the bean, and that's what I like to see at my roast levels. So there's some shrinkage in the bean. If I would have kept going, the bean would have started to expand, and it would have gotten smoother and shinier, and that modeling, that wrinkling would have gone away. And so I'm pleased with the end result of the color, the texture, the temperatures looked about right. And so now I'm going to hit the cool end, hit the off button here, and then my phases are going to be present. Now, I know that I was a little late calling first crack, and so what I'm doing here in Artisan, I was probably about 9 seconds, 14 seconds is what I determined. I was a little late, so you're going to see me make an adjustment here. Same thing with dry. If you're going through dry and you realize you called it late, you can go back and you can edit your profile to be able to adjust for that. And so that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to roast properties, and then I'm going to click on the events tab, and there you see it right below the colors, when dry end, when first crack. And so 9 minutes and 9 seconds is where I marked it, but it was really like 8:55, I think. And so I'm making the change here. I'm going to go ahead and make that change, and that'll actually change the percentage of the that middle phase. So there's my 8:55 time, and yep, there it is. And so this is pretty accurate to what my what was happening with my roast, give or take a couple seconds within that browning phase. And so I've got a 50.2% dry time, and again, it would have been a little shorter, but I used a 5-degree lower charge temp. So that's just an example of when you're trying to find the right charge temperature. I should have gone 5 degrees higher, and that would have got me below my 5-minute target, because in the way that I'm roasting, that's what my goal is to be able to do with this roaster. But I ended up being over. I was at 5 minutes and 18 seconds, and so what that did was that caused me to know that I had to have a later and a longer middle phase to be able to, well, just because my dry phase was longer as well. So I have a 34% middle phase, this browning phase, 3 minutes and 36 seconds. And then a minute and 39 second in development with 15.6%. So there it goes. I thought it was 13%. I made that adjustment, and you saw how that influenced the development time as well. So that's pretty much within the target of what I wanted, was a 15-minute and that's what we got. Now, last but not least, this screen right here, this is interesting. Artisan allows you to analyze. And so I went to Tools and Analyze, and I think it was the X2 when I went. And I wanted to see what was going to happen with my variation of my descent line. And so Artisan has this cool way of being able to mark and show you ideally where I should have been along my descent. And it's pretty cool. This is about as far as I get as far as technical ability and knowledge with Artisan. I still don't understand all of the things that the analyzer really teaches me. So I kind of came down, and I should have kind of not let it drop quite so much during that middle phase. I should have let it follow that line, but that line wasn't there. That line wasn't there until after I used the analysis tool. So you're kind of doing this based on the times and the temperatures using those boxes that I shared with you. And if you can stay pretty close to your targets and have a nice consistent line, then you'll be very happy, and it'll look very similar to what Artisan is marking here with that angular line. Also, you can see the roasting curve that Artisan put in behind my bean temp, and that's in a real light line too. So still a lot for me to learn about Artisan, but as far as knowing what Artisan is telling me during the roast, some of those tips, some of those times and those areas that Artisan displays, estimated times of your phases, that's a huge help. A lot of you have said, well, how do you know how long to roast during that middle phase? Or how are you able to target your first crack time? Well, I know based on the three phases of coffee roasting, the dry phase, the browning phase, and the development phase, that I want about 35% for my roast time for my middle browning phase. That's the way that I'm roasting. And so I can use that knowledge and Artisan's projected times, estimated times based on the descent of my rate of rise to be able to get really close to that percentage. And so that's what I've done. So just to highlight that top area, let me go back and just show the picture to you. This top area where the percentages of your dry, your ramp, which is the middle phase, and the development phase, the third phase, those are showing up there, but it's that small number to the right of ramp, to the left of the development percentage that says 351. That number is the number that I'm watching and that I am manipulating through my rate of rise to help me craft my middle phase, my browning phase. So if I know that that's going to be really short, and this goes back to the video that I have on how to roast tasty and sweet coffee, or I think the video is something about that. I've got a link here, and it's up in the corner here. You'll be able to see that video. But ultimately, I know that if it's short, it's going to be a tart bomb, and that those complex flavors that are being developed through these reactions that are taking place, that's not going to happen. I'm not giving it enough time for that to happen. So the tasting notes that you really want to have, if you have a very short, if you're flying through your roast and you've got a very short middle phase, you're losing out on a lot of those flavors. If you go too long, then those flavors are going to become muted, and you actually are going to start to go into kind of some of the bitter notes as well. So the browning phase, there's a whole video on that. Check that out. But that's that number that I'm looking at, that 351 number here in this static part of the roast. And then depending on how my middle phase goes, and here's the beauty of this, of using Artisan. Depending upon how my middle phase goes, I may alter the length of my development time. If I have a faster middle phase, I may want to try to slow down and have a little bit longer of a development phase, hoping to allow some of that caramelization to take place and to get some flavor development. But it's still not going to be the profile that I would want. It's still not going to have all the flavor development that takes place during that middle phase that I would want. At least that's my understanding of it. You guys will have to experiment and determine that for yourselves. As I've always said on this channel, I am learning just like you are. The best thing to do is to start with the basic concepts, some of the things that I'm talking about. Use that as maybe a starting point or a reference, and compare that to what you've experienced with your roasts. Your roasting devices are different than mine. Your environmental temperatures are different than mine. So we are going to get some different results. But you can take at least this knowledge that I've shared with you and now use that to your advantage while you're roasting to be able to control your roast better and to be able to manipulate and craft your times during each of these phases. And that's really the beauty of Artisan. The other beauty of Artisan is that I have this roast now as a reference. So as I have tasted this coffee and I've looked at what's happened, I can go back into Artisan and make notes here. I can also reference any of my tasting notes that I may have in a journal. However you guys want to organize yourself. The last video that I did, I talked about documenting your roast, writing things down, times and temperatures. Well, Artisan does that for you if you're going to use Artisan as your source of reference, because they provide a place for notes. They provide a place for you to be able to kind of journal your coffee experience. So that will be for another video. We'll go into Artisan a little bit further, but I wanted to share primarily the phases, the temperatures, and some of the readings that I have that are helping me be able to achieve some of these different percentages and times in my roasting profile. And because that's what I've been talking about in a lot of my videos. So I hope that this has been helpful for you guys. If you like what you've seen, hit the like button. If you aren't a subscriber to my channel, please subscribe. That would really help me out a lot. I'm putting out regular content to help home coffee roasters, and you subscribing would be a great help for me, and I really do appreciate it. And also hit that alert bell notification if you want to be notified. All right, so I think that's it, you guys. If you have questions or if I've missed something here that you don't understand, leave them in the comments. If you've got some tips with Artisan that can help others and help myself, please leave those. I'd love to hear that. Again, I am not an advanced artisan. I'm kind of a beginner artisan guy myself. This is pretty much most of the extent of how I've been using Artisan, and I do want to learn how to use it even further. And the Artisan document page, again, once you go to the download page, you can just look there on the site. They've got an area that has some videos, it has some white papers so that you can understand exactly how this works and take it to the next level. All right. Thank you so much for joining me today here at the Virtual Coffee Lab. I hope you guys have a great week roasting, and we'll see you next time.